Hi everybody, Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. With me today, I've got Rick Tucci. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about his book, Ideas to Action, Unlock Your Organization's Hidden Genius to Ignite Innovation and Accelerate Results. Rick, thank you so much for coming on today and talking about your book. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, terrific. Well, thank you for inviting me.
Well, no, you're welcome. Where can people find you?
Well, easiest way to find me is on LinkedIn. I post there quite often. You can, of course, find the book on Amazon and other major booksellers. And if you want more about my company and our solutions, you can go to ideastoaction.ai.
So just move to one side because you're covering the book up on. That's it. So people can see, can visualize what they're looking for.
I got you. Okay.
That's it. Yeah. So Rick, I really enjoyed it. It's a book that I've actually been looking for a long time, because one of the things about leadership is that as you go up in terms of leadership, you become further distanced from the front line. So it's very easy to become distanced from your business. So it's something that I'd always been looking for. So tell us what the inspiration is for the book.
Well, I can probably summarize it in a simple truth that I learned early in my career, and it's that organizations don't suffer from a lack of ideas. What they suffer from is a deficit in ownership. And I'll let that sink in for just a minute, but I'd like to amplify it if you'll indulge me and take you to the story, because I really can't take credit for that epiphany. It really came to me as a result of finding myself actually in Tokyo, Japan, in a Toyota motor plant on a study mission with a group of colleagues way back in the early 90s. And we're there trying to figure out the secrets of TQM and the Toyota production process to bring it back to our clients in the US. And of course, we're getting a tour through the factory and, impressed by the immaculate floors and color-coded production flow and charts and graphs up on the wall. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking this is going to be a really heavy lift back in the US. But we were determined, and the firm I was with had a mission that we were going to bring this methodology. And so we made a game try at it. About 2 years after that, I'm riding home from another disappointing deployment, just not sticking and getting the results we wanted. And I thought back to the visit, and I remembered something that the plant supervisor who was giving us the tour said to me at the end of the tour, when I kind of acknowledged to him, gosh, you guys have just done something amazing here that I don't know that we can duplicate. And he said to me, Tucci-san, I've been to America. Your workers are no different than ours. The difference between us is that we make it easy for them to share their ideas and put them into action. And that was the light bulb. That basically caused me to just rethink everything I had sort of learned about change management and crafting the vision and getting the coalition of the willing together to make change happen, and then rolling it out with preparing the soil with the training and what have you. What I came to realize is that while all of that may be necessary, it's not the critical. The critical is recognizing that people execute on what they own, not what's rented to them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's actually a Tom Peters quote that I make in the book about nobody ever brings a rental car back washing it before they turn it in. People commit to what they own, and what, particularly at the front line, what people own is their know-how and their ideas. And that's the currency of getting change executed, maybe not formulated, but executed. And that's the thesis of the book. And my career since then has been all focused, whispering into leaders' ears that simple truth and trying to get them to embrace a process to make it easier and simpler to get at that wisdom at the front lines and motivate the front line to take control of their ideas and put them into action.
So you advise leaders to start where the energy is, rather than just where the strategic gap is. If the frontline energy is focused on a minor annoyance, but the company is bleeding cash in a different department, how does a leader reconcile that tension?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think you're right to call it out, because I think this is the dilemma that so many leaders face, because they've been burned in the past by engagement efforts that don't yield results, and it produces something that I like to call the psychological impasse to change, where from top to middle to bottom there is this skepticism that gets built over time around failed engagement programs, whether it's suggestion systems or town halls or other such efforts, and breaking through that requires what I like to say is finding the intersection between strategy and engagement. And a quick story, if I might, that I think exemplifies the point. Early on in our days of experimenting with this different way of trying to engage frontline employees and actually get to action and results, we were involved with, if not the largest, one of the largest environmental services companies in the world. I mean, these are guys that basically pick up trash and get rid of it for us. And they had deployed a massive operational excellence program across their global network, trying to reduce costs, improve service, reduce accidents, et cetera. And we were invited out to one of their fueling yards, one of their truck yards on the outskirts of Chicago. And we went to observe what was going on, because they had instituted a new refueling program that mandated that the drivers at the end of their shift get into the yard and refuel their trucks before the morning to get a faster morning start. And they had done this analysis to figure out the cost savings in fuel and in route completion and reduction in all the analysis was there that said this is a spot on strategy. The problem was, as we observed it, at the end of the day, the fuel yard's a hot mess, because you've got trucks coming from all over the place, all trying to get through one narrow entrance. And there's one thing about drivers at the end of a shift: they just want to get home to dinner with their family.
Yeah.
And so every day, and this has gone on for years, as the branch manager would tell me, I'd always hear the horns honking at the end of the day, and I knew the shift was coming to an end. So anyway, to make a long story a little bit shorter here, we gathered a group of truck drivers and dispatchers and fuelers, and we asked them a simple question: how do we solve the traffic jam? And of course, we got a bunch of ideas that were non-starters, but there was one idea on the wall, one word: Disney. We're all kind of looking quizzically at it, and the fellow who wrote it piped up and said, "Yeah, I wrote that, and I just took my kids on a trip to Disney World, and they figured out how to solve this problem. They have this snake line at all the rides, and you get in the line, and you have to wait, but it moves along, and you kind of feel like you're going to get there, and everybody's orderly, nobody's pushing, nobody's shoving." Well, 2 days later, they had the snake line implemented in that fuel yard, and lo and behold, every truck's getting fueled at the end of the day. They're getting started right on time in the morning. They took the concept and, of course, spread it across their global network, and the rest is history. Millions saved, happier drivers getting home at night. That's what happens when you find the intersection between what's important for the organization, strategy, and what really resonates at the front line. Because, while those drivers could understand that, hey, we got to save money on fuel, what they're concerned about is their own safety, and they're concerned about getting home. And when we could find that intersection, that's where the magic happened, to get them to take ownership to solve the problem that nobody had solved before.
You tell the story of Ira, a 28-year-old web designer who ended up leading a team of senior executives. Is your process effectively a cheat code that allows junior employees to bypass traditional corporate hierarchy?
Yeah, it's a good description, Tim. Cheat sheet. I like that. We had a little bit of a different name for it. We called it the Read to Lead manual. And what we discovered is that, in organizations there are leaders hidden in plain sight all over.
Yep.
The problem is that there aren't enough positions. There aren't enough formal positions of leadership available to give them a chance to show what their potential is. And that's, the beauty of change and innovation, which is there are endless opportunities, but there's not necessarily a reliable and effective way to be able to take folks who don't do change for a living and make them change agents. And what we found is that if we could package that process in a way that you could literally open up a guidebook and read a script of what to do in the meeting step by step, anyone is capable of being able to lead a meeting if they're willing to follow the process and have the desire to lead a team. And that was Ira. He was this young kid, a web designer, working in the communications department of this organization. And he gets tapped on the shoulder by his boss to walk into a room and lead a group of senior executives in figuring out how to put their company scorecard up on the web. Now, Ira's the hero in the story, but there's another hero in the story, and that's his manager, because she had the foresight to realize that, one, she'd get a better product if she could sit in the chair as a team member and a peer.
Yep.
But secondly, that because she was confident in the process, she could give that responsibility to Ira and know that he would be successful. And he was. And he went on to various promotions and ended up being a tremendous advocate for the process.
You advocate for the 1-4-60 rule, which is 1 hour for meetings, 4 hours for work, and 60 days to results. In a world of move fast and break things, isn't 60 days actually too slow, or is sprint speed something other than just the calendar?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, in certain circumstances, it's absolutely too slow. I mean, if the house is burning, you can't wait 60 days to put the fire out. At the same time, if you've got to rebuild the house, you're not going to get it done in 60 days. It's going to take longer. But the 60 days and the rule that we came up with around limiting the time for meetings and for how frontline employees would engage in change and improvement revolved around a very simple revelation, and that is motivation to change at the front lines is highly perishable. And what we mean by that is for folks who do the jobs of producing the products, serving the customers, keeping the lights on, they operate at a very different pace than we as leaders. They don't have the luxury of spending 3 hours in a meeting, speculating on different outcomes or jawboning around their own favorite idea. They need to be efficient and quick if you're going to ask them to contribute their intellectual capital to the game. And so what we found about the 60 days, that it was about, and this was after many, many experiments and some successes and some failures, that 60 days was enough time to not only give an opportunity for frontline employees to get their ideas on the table, organize, sort, prioritize them, start to think about how to implement, but actually get to a significant enough level of results that they could feel good about what they accomplished and go back to their jobs. And so what we found is that if you're going to engage the front line, you need to think about it as not a one and done, but also not as a marathon, but rather as a repeating cycle that you run in your organization as part of the rhythm of operation. And so, for us, our best clients were always the one that adapted this sprint mentality and would run 2 or 3 campaigns a year. And depending on the size of the organization, scale them from a handful of teams to, in some cases, we had organizations running hundreds of teams a year, but doing it in a very controlled and systematic way, and always focused on making sure we got to results within that 60-day marker, and then allowed people to go and sort of recoup and get back to their jobs and play for another day.
In your airline case study, ground crews were using plastic bottles instead of safety ones because process discipline had vanished. How do you prevent an organization from sliding back into makeshift solutions once the excitement of a 60-day sprint wears off?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's one of my favorite stories in the book because it speaks, to a fundamental issue that what gets modeled at the top is what gets performed at the front lines. And if you don't have the top team aligned around the same kinds of behaviors we're asking of the front line, even if it's in a different venue and at a different pace, you're going to get predictably bad results. And in the case of the airline and the marshal was out on the field using Coke bottles, that situation happened on the heels of actually one of the most successful turnarounds in airline history. But 2 years later, at their largest hub, things had deteriorated and decayed because organizations operate with a big rubber band around their waist, and that rubber band represents all the old and in some cases non-productive behaviors, and you can stretch it by doing things like implementing programs like the ideas to action process. But if you don't maintain the tension, that band is going to pull you back, and typically the tension gets broken when you have changes in leadership, when you have turnover at the front lines, when you have some unforeseen external events that just create a crisis situation. And it's exactly what happened here. And so the leader that I talk about in that case, just a remarkable guy, a naval pilot turned into a chief operating officer here at this large hub operation, recognized that he had to start right at the top with his top team and get them back to the basics, and to understand if they didn't do the things that set the conditions, there was no way they could get the front line to execute the way they wanted to. And a small anecdote about what the right things are. One of the disciplines that we advise for leadership teams, and you mentioned it in one of our earlier conversations, is about sorting out the X's versus the Y's, and understanding what's the outcome we need, and what's really the key driver that can get us there. And they were just plagued by not being able to get airplanes in and out of the hub because they were always short of labor. And as Dan in the book says, I knew we were in trouble when I looked at the pizza budget, because when it takes supervisors having to order pizza every day to bribe people to come to work, you've got a problem.
Yeah.
And the solution that they figured out by spending some time to really think about what could they do as leaders to alleviate that problem was recognizing their number one mandate was to fill the roster every day, every morning, to ensure we had enough people on the line to do the work. Because if you don't have enough people are going to cut corners. They're going to start using Coke bottles. They're going to start engaging in unsafe practices. And so all the leadership team needed to do is to make sure they provided the people to do the work. And then the front line took over, and they got back to the disciplines that made them so successful 2 years earlier.
So, Rick, last question. You suggest that senior leaders should openly discuss how their daily interactions undermine each other. In a high ego C-suite, isn't asking for that level of vulnerability a recipe for political suicide?
Yeah, it certainly can be. And you've got to tread very carefully here. Look, organizations are political animals, and the higher you go, the sharper the swords and the thicker the armor. And we never suggest starting in any engagement with an executive team that's looking to try to make change and improvement happen faster by engaging in some kind of kumbaya or rocks and ropes. I mean, those exercise, those have a place, but what we found is that trust at the most senior levels of an organization is much better addressed, less from an intentions point of view and more from an actions. In other words, can I trust your actions? I don't need to know your intentions. Whatever your intentions are your intentions. I can't read your mind, but what I can react to is your behaviors, your actions. And so what we focus attention on is getting leaders to at the top to embrace a set of disciplines. There are 5 of them, and they start with something very simple as what's our meeting hygiene. In other words, how are we going to behave in meetings? One voice at a time. What we say in the meeting stays in the meeting unless we agree it goes outside. Any basic stuff, but you get into teams and you find they just haven't talked about these things. So we work through a sequence of these disciplines, and the last one is the trust discipline. And there, it's a very simple exchange of getting people to disclose what they want and what they want to contribute to that team and what they need back if they're going to be the best contributor they can be for that team. Look, and it doesn't work all the time. I mean, there's still issues that come up and past crimes that end up getting relitigated. But we find that executive teams, just as their folks on the front line, need a regular discipline and a checkup, and that's one way that we find you can make that happen.
Rick Tucci, thank you so much for coming on and talking about your book, Ideas to Action: Unlock Your Organization's Hidden Genius to Ignite Innovation and Accelerate Results. Rick, if I wanted to get a copy, where can I get one from?
You can go to Amazon. I believe it's available certainly in the UK and other international sites and here in the US.
And where can I find information about you?
Probably certainly easiest, just go on LinkedIn, and my profile's there, and you can also check out my company.
Are you the only Rick Tucci on LinkedIn, or does someone else have the pleasure of your?
As far as I can tell, no, but
you never
there
know.
are other Tuccis out there, and they're much more famous than I. So
okay, Rick, thank you so much for coming on and talking about your book, sharing your insight and your inspiration. Thank you so much for that,
Tim.